Dominic, hey,
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I like hanging out with guys like you because you're very efficient.
I was right on time. I was just in time for the.
You're just in time, but also we only spoke last week, and here we are. Our schedules lined up, and we're ready to do this podcast, video, whatever.
I feel like I'm having a fireside chat with you, so this is nice.
Oh, because of the fireplace.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, and those kids that are in the pictures aren't home right now, so we can be having this conversation without the sound of elephants trumpeting through the background.
good.
Yeah. Well, Mark, as we get started here, maybe we should give some context to our listeners. This is the Cabinet Maker Profit System blog or podcast and blog and everything. So you know who our market is, but they don't necessarily know who you are, though they might recognize some of your stuff. Who's Mark Graban and why are you here?
Yeah, well, I'm not here because I'm an expert in cabinet making. I own cabinets, so that's something. Um, my background originally, I'm an industrial engineer by bachelor's degree. I've got master's degrees in mechanical engineering and an MBA. So from the sounds of that, you would think I would be working in manufacturing companies. And that was my early idea of a career path. I worked for General Motors, Dell Computer, Honeywell, got the bug of a startup software company in between. So I appreciate and admire entrepreneurs, including those in your audience. So I had always been focused on culture change, leadership, and in the context of getting everybody participating in continuous improvement. So the one popular label or banner for that is usually referred to as lean manufacturing. It's based on the Toyota production system. And there are pros and cons of the word lean, but when that term was coined by some MIT researchers about 30 years ago, the idea was to separate it a bit from Toyota, because when I worked at General Motors, it was kind of forbidden at the time to copy Toyota. They're going to do something better and very General Motors-ish.
Right.
The reality was they were scrambling to catch up to Toyota by copying them, which good things to copy. But it helped also, I think, emphasize that the Toyota production system is not about building cars. It's a culture, it's a philosophy, it's an improvement system, and it really is transferable to other settings. So for about 13 years, I've focused very much on healthcare. I work as a consultant for hospitals and health systems, really trying to apply these principles to help a hospital or a clinic be the best it can be.
Right.
Kind of adopting and adapting lessons from other settings and looking at work as a process and focusing on the customer and trying to create an environment where everyone can succeed.
I love it. Adopting and adapting. And I think if anybody listening to this right now is thinking, hey, Rubino, why did you bring a hospital specialist onto our cabinet maker platform? Yeah. It's for exactly that reason. I feel like it's my job to bring new perspectives, just new ways of seeing things to the guys that are listening to this. And we get stuck in our own reality. We think everybody's a cabinet maker or everybody either needs cabinets or doesn't yet. And that's not the case. And so we have to look around us to find, inspiration or ideas from outside of the industry. And that's why I'm excited to have you here. That's how I found you actually on your blog.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did. But historical tidbit, supposedly, I wasn't there. I believe the story is true. This is what I've read. Do you know where Henry Ford got the inspiration 100 years ago for the classic moving assembly line?
No.
He or somebody in his company went to a meat packing plant, and they saw basically, apologies if anyone's eating lunch right now, animal disassembly.
Right.
On a moving line, and they were inspired because before that, cars were built with the car sitting in place and people kind of moving around it and building it very much a craft build. So even the origins of the assembly line come from other industries. Now, lean manufacturing is not all about assembly lines. You can do lean work in manufacturing or in other settings without the assembly line. But I think it's just an interesting example of, we should open our eyes and get different experiences we can learn from.
Yeah. Well, as I've said to you in our previous conversations, I use lean process a lot as a business coach. Yeah. And I even use it myself. If I'm going to do something twice, I'm going to create a system for it. So the first time I create it, I put my time in. and the second time it's a fill in the blanks. It works in the office setting as well, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I try to practice what I preached this morning. I recorded a podcast and I have a checklist that I follow for that. I recorded or I hosted a webinar for somebody early, and checklists are not meant to shut off your brain. Checklists are helpful. And if you look at aviation, cockpit, the movie Sully and that amazing story, healthcare has been learning from pilots in aviation about how checklists can help make sure things don't fall through the cracks in frantic, busy, stressful situations, or even in everyday work. So building process around something shouldn't preclude creativity when it's needed, and it certainly shouldn't prevent ongoing improvement.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things actually that this group, cabinet makers, they're very creative because they're really good with their hands and they can see problems in 3 dimension. They see maybe sometimes too much. They can see things from all angles. They're really good at that problem solving.
Yeah,
and, checklists focuses us.
I like the way you said look at it from all angles. I think in a way that's what Lean is about. Instead of looking at the work in a silo, my work, my department, Lean teaches us and challenges to look at things from different directions, to bring in a team of people across different departments, make sure we're not suboptimizing part of the overall system, getting the customer perspective and going and observing what the customer's needs are to make sure we're fulfilling them. To me, that sounds like Lean as well.
Yeah. Well, so one of my clients right now does large commercial work, and having a business coach to them is something outside of their comfort zone. I've been working with them for quite a while, but I knew that it was a new experience for them. Well, they are now doing a build for a really large industrial project, and that builder, actually the general contractors, use a Lean process.
Good.
And so my client came back to us at our coaching meeting and he said, Dom, all that stuff we talk about in our meetings, they got it on their board too.
Good.
So it was nice to see that it really is everywhere. A general contractor can use it, and so can the guy doing the cabinets. And the other people in that meeting with my client, who's a subcontractor, we're the drywall guys, the electrical guys, the flooring guys, etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Lean, one of the challenges that I've always noticed in my business, the business of business improvement, is that Lean seems daunting. Like it's a big thing to take on. So why does it feel like it's hard to do? And then maybe towards the end of that, tell us some easy things, easy wins you've seen from any industry.
Well, so there's sort of 2 sides of the coin, or there's sort of a catch-22, where I recently read an article about the woman who's the plant manager for the Toyota assembly plant in Georgetown, Kentucky. And so they have 8,000 employees. Their process has been changed and radically overhauled in the last couple of years. I think it was something like 40% of their employees have been there 5 years or less. So when the plant first opened 30 years ago, they've now got people retiring.
Right.
They're expanding, they're thriving, more employees are coming in. So she described this process. They don't take it for granted that they need to teach the new employees about the Toyota production system. And she said, it takes years. And you think, well, now that sounds daunting, right? But I think the way we learn about Lean is through practice. And we've got to start somewhere. So the practice of Kaizen, a Japanese word for continuous improvement, really kind of points to the idea of starting small. And I know you've talked to somebody who's great, Paul Akers, 2-second Lean. Says if you can find any small idea that saves you 2 seconds, that's worth doing. And that's a really powerful classic Kaizen mindset that people in healthcare say, we're too busy to fix all of the big, complicated, messy, sticky problems. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Find something you can solve right now that makes your work a little bit better. The nurses might say, or you might observe, and they take this for granted now, climbing down on the floor under a table to plug in a portable computer that's on a cart. And they might have gotten used to that, which is kind of sad. But then when you ask that, well, is that really the easiest, best way to do that? They say, well, yeah, sure, we'd love power outlets up above the desk. And you're like, we can make that happen. That's a work order. That could happen the next day. And now people start thinking, oh, little problems aren't worth bringing up. Little problems. And then you start asking, what can you solve? So that's not just about writing work orders, but getting people engaged, getting the ball rolling. I think the best way to start with Kaizen and Lean is just to ask what bugs you and what can you fix? And Paul talks about very similar things because this comes from sort of a similar basis in literature. Paul's not making up his own thing and I'm making up something separate. Lean and Kaizen principles are pretty consistent.
I love that. So, looping back to the things I talk about, when we do something called, and this is a very thrilling piece of business here, there's this finance and forecast meeting agenda that we use. But part of that finance and forecast meeting agenda, the fun part, is called Profit Lab, which is kind of the closing thing that whoever's chairing that meeting is going to walk the team through. But that's where you get a chance as the leader to say, okay, folks, where do you see opportunity in the company and who's going to do what by when about it? That in itself is lean. It's just that people don't, often wrap their heads around it. So glad to hear that. It's coming together in many places. Yeah,
and you can start small ideas bubbling up, but then there are elements of lean that tend to start up at the executive level of defining the terminology we use is your true north. What's the direction of the organization? What are the key metrics that you need to track? What do we need to improve? And you start creating alignment through the organization so that now the bigger projects can be prioritized and aligned to that organizational need. So that's why I said there's always two sides of the same coin. You ask people, what bugs you? What can we fix now?
Right.
That can build enthusiasm and capabilities that people then start applying to solving bigger problems over time. So that's where, Toyota would say lean is not just engaging employees in improvement. It's also a management system and a culture. And there's a philosophy, and that might take time to learn.
Yeah.
And it might take time to build up, let's say, our problem solving skills. I feel like, after 20 some years with this, I'm certainly still learning and practicing, and I'm still trying to get good at this.
Yeah.
Because it's not so simple as like flipping a switch and saying, all right, I took a 1 week class and now I know this.
Oh, yeah, I read a book and now I'm a genius.
And it's tempting early on. There's a certain human nature to that. I've learned enough to be dangerous, people say, right?
Yeah, that's me with foreign languages. I know quite a few foreign languages to the level where I can order food, but I don't know those foreign languages well enough to send it back.
Yeah.
I'm just stuck with whatever I ordered.
Yeah.
So you actually mentioned something there that's interesting that this industry looks at a lot, which is metrics or numbers, performance metrics. But I also have to say there's so many metrics that once I start diving into the numbers, the rabbit holes are everywhere. How do I figure out the most important performance metrics to focus on so that I get some value for the company?
So I think there's two dimensions to the question you asked there. One is, how do you narrow down the number of metrics? So a lot of times people say KPIs. Yeah. Like, wait, let's pause. What does KPI stand for? It stands for key performance indicator, not cajillion performance indicators.
Well, I'm going to use that one. That's good.
Fair enough. But I draw an analogy to health. There are hundreds of different laboratory tests and measures of our body, but if we really boil it down to, it might be different for different individuals, but maybe 4 key indicators that tell you generally, am I healthy? Am I healthier? Am I moving in the wrong direction? You don't need hundreds of lab tests every month or every week. So I think in organizations, you ask, what are the key indicators of not just profitability, but growth, quality, other, cash flow, other factors? You might boil it down to a couple of measures. And then there's I think the issue of how do you avoid going down the rabbit hole? Yeah. Where I think even if you boil it down to 5 key measures, there's a real tendency to overreact to every up and down in the metric. What happened last week? Why is that number worse? And the reality is sometimes even in a consistent business, the same people doing the same things in the same market, every metric is going to fluctuate from day to day, to week, month to month. And there are some really important lessons I feel fortunate to have learned that help you filter out, if you will, the noise in the data so that you're looking for and reacting to meaningful signals in those data. So that, if we get down 50 different rat holes, instead of saying these 2 metrics are worth investigating, we focus our effort And in the language of lean, we waste less time, and we perform better, which I think are the goals there.
Yeah. For a furniture maker, a cabinet maker, an architectural millwork person, there's quite often they focus on linear feet, some price on linear foot, and that's not necessarily the right way to price. But they also what I've found is people get focused on things within companies in a very specific way. One of the questions I ask that shouldn't knock people off their seats, but quite often does, is what's your profit per X? Mm-hmm. And I don't know what the X is. I'm asking, is it profit per job? Is it profit per man? Is it profit per man hour? If it's profit per man hour, do you count your building as one man, including its costs in that profit per man?
Yeah.
And again, that's if profit is the driver. If the driver is actually to keep this company going as a family legacy business, profit might be part of the conversation, but not necessarily always the end goal.
Sure.
There's so many nuances there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where the true north for different organizations is going to vary. If somebody is trying to grow as quickly as possible, that's a different strategy than I want to preserve the family business at all costs. You might become a little more cautious, and that's neither good nor bad. It's just that's the goal of that particular organization, right?
Yeah. So when we go to set out what our metrics are, performance metrics, what should we be looking for in any given company to know this number or this theme should be important? Let's think about it more until we come up with a number.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's one framework that comes from Toyota, has been adopted, throughout the auto industry and manufacturing, gets brought into healthcare in slightly different ways. The mantra had always been safety, quality, and some organizations combine those. We'll say, okay, safety and quality are in the same ballpark, but safety, employee safety. If you can't have a safe workplace, what else matters? That's just that should
nobody should die at work. Yeah,
a top priority. It should be a given. It should be a top priority. Safety, quality, delivery, which could mean basically on-time delivery, cost, and employee morale. And part of the idea is if, at least the hypothesis would be in most businesses, if you address safety, quality, on-time delivery, which means improving flow, you're going to get lower costs. And then employee morale, I'd say is sort of more of the surrounds all of that. So, good employee morale is built upon safety. Yes. Good morale feeds into quality, delivery, and cost performance. And I think part of the difference in the lean philosophy is, and it's different than quote unquote cost cutting, which focuses on cost and getting rid of and slashing, where a lot of times, lean looks at cost as an end result of those other metrics. Right. And, I think a lot of business leaders of various size businesses have said lean is a better growth strategy than it is a shrinking business strategy.
Nice.
So when you think about that cliche of do more with less, obviously, or ideally, we'd like to do more business with the same number of people, perhaps, right? Or we could double our revenue without doubling our employee base. So we would aim for a more scalable business. And lean is a way to help with that.
Yeah. It's an interesting way to look at things. When we come, a lot of this requires digging into the numbers, just knowing our numbers. Sure. Or taking action when we see something that frustrates us, like you mentioned about Paul Akers and the 2-second challenge. But knowing that I should be spending X and I don't want to spend too little and I don't want to spend too much. So there's this variance, like you said, right? Yeah. I know that if I'm buying wood that's just too cheap, I'm paying for it somewhere. What's going on with this? Right. Or if I'm getting labor that's just too cheap, or, there's always something. We have a threshold where we go, well, I'm not willing to go below that threshold. And I think you can even look at how we buy cars. You can buy very cheap cars, but all of us made a decision on our vehicle based on price and value, value, price, and function. But there's cheaper options out there. If you just wanted to get the cheapest van, you'd get an Astro van to deliver. Chevrolet, but you'd get an Astro van to deliver your cabinetry or to move things. It's just not the right tool for the application. So you expect to spend X.
Right.
on a reasonable van, and that would be a great argument. But
Yeah.
that's a metric as well.
Well, so when you look at the book, and I recommend to people, there's a book called The Toyota Way, written by University of Michigan professor Jeff Liker, who spent a lot of time studying Japan, learning, or in Japan and in the US, learning from Toyota. There's 14 principles of the Toyota Way. Principle number 1 says, basically, I might be paraphrasing, make decisions based on the long term, even at the expense of the short term. So I think to your car buying analogy, you could buy a car that's cheaper off the lot, but it's going to kill you in maintenance costs down the road, right? So, you've got to, and sometimes a business has got to look at cash flow and, understand, but ideally we're making decisions that are a little bit more long-term focused. And, there are plenty of ways to get cheap that hurt quality. It's really hard to improve quality. I mean, sure, you could use more expensive components, but a lot of ways of improving quality lead to lower cost, reducing scrap in rework, not delivering the wrong thing to the wrong place, not building the wrong thing in the wrong place. Those are all things that add cost. And when we have a better process and you eliminate those defects, you might reduce costs, and then maybe you can upgrade some of the components and become a better value provider to your customer.
We use a formula for reinventing a business from the inside, reinventing it from within. So it's like building an airplane while you're flying it, right? You're hammering in, you're leaning out the window and hammering in these rivets, and you're removing these ones, and you're doing it while you're flying it. That's what business coaching is, and there's formulas for that. No surprise. Some of those parts of those formulas are what to do and what to ignore. And where to look for what you need to change. And what I have found again and again over my 18 plus years of this is that my clients always think it's the expensive stuff that's going to have the impact. And it's actually the cheap stuff, like better communication or having effective meetings. People right now are rolling their eyes. Please, if you're driving, keep your eyes on the road. But, Dom, I don't want to do more meetings. Okay. But if you have better, more effective meetings, and you communicate better with your team, your expectations, waste goes down, quality goes up. I mean, there's a real that you can draw a direct line between those things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that investment of time in planning, communication, problem solving, building teamwork, you would hope that's an investment that pays off. We had 4 people in the room for 15 minutes. They developed a solution that's going to save each of those 4 people 5 minutes a day. You do the math. I'm like, that time paid for itself in a week.
Yeah.
And over enough time, it becomes an almost infinite ROI.
Yeah.
And then, there's a challenge of, I think, a question of what do you do if business is a little bit slow? Toyota and Honda and some other companies, when they have a slow period, whether it's a couple of days till the end of the shift, days, weeks, months, like back 10 years ago during the financial meltdown, Toyota and companies like that will continue paying their workers to come in and do training, quality improvement. Toyota at times has even paid employees to go build houses for Habitat for Humanity.
Wow.
Well, why would you do that? Well, you're developing teamwork and leadership skills. You're investing in the community. Think of the loyalty that they're creating amongst their customers and the goodwill that they get in the community. I would look at it and say they're not necessarily being charitable. I think they're making long-term decisions that thankfully they can afford to make. Where if you look at companies like GM or even recently Tesla is operating this way, or a lot of hospitals, they look at their employees as a cost and say, nope, we're going to send you home. You don't get paid.
Yeah.
And whether that's assembly workers or nurses, that's really disheartening. And you're just throwing away this resource. The people and their time.
To train and find.
Yeah. So increasing morale, especially in healthcare, helps reduce turnover, which is a huge cost saver to an organization as well. It's often said it costs almost $100,000 to hire and replace a nurse. So if a hospital can improve the workplace environment and reduce nurse turnover from 25% down, cut it in half to 12.5%, that's millions of dollars a year.
So Mark,
savings.
That's an interesting number. If it costs $100,000 to find and train and replace a nurse, what is that X as part of a nurse's salary? Is that 75% of a nurse's salary? Is that 1.25% of their salary?
It depends on the type of nursing. It's probably roughly on par with their salary and benefits.
So it's 1-to-1.
Thereabouts, I'd say.
So, and the reason I asked that question is because we are doing comparisons today that I want our listeners to think about. If you're paying a guy right now 60 grand and you're thinking about laying him off because times are slow and you haven't made some deals, I get it from a cash flow perspective and it might make all the sense in the world. Let's assume that we all understand that. But what you're saying as well that you've seen in other industries is that it's going to cost me 60 grand if I lose that guy by laying him off to replace him and bring him up to speed.
It could, right? It very well could. So you can look and say, well, I'm going to pay $10,000 in the short term for work that's quote unquote not productive. But you could consider that if you have the cash position to do so, consider that an investment in that individual and therefore in your company. So, Tesla right now, there are people who say Tesla is burning cash and, there's a situation where you're thinking about making sure you don't run out of cash. But 2011, there was, the earthquake and tsunami that, hit Japan and some other locations. There was one auto supplier in Japan that was hit hard, knocked offline. And this supplier made, I forget if it was parts or paint, solvent, something that was used by different automakers. So in that same time frame, and I blogged about this, you see the side-by-side headlines of Toyota paying their people to come to work, even though they weren't building cars, to invest in them. General Motors had almost the exact same amount of money in the bank. GM said, nope, we're going to put people on short-term layoffs. So to me, that says it's not that GM couldn't afford it. It was just more of the mindset that even at that point, GM wasn't valuing and respecting their employees the same way Toyota was. Now, Toyota's not perfect. I'm not trying to paint too rosy of a picture, but I think there is a really compelling difference in those decisions at that same point in time.
Yeah. And all of these are decisions based on knowing your numbers, which is how we come back to why you're on here. So I found you through your blog, the Lean blog. It looks like behind you, you've got your logo there, but it's leanblog.
Leanblog.org.
Leanblog.org. So for people that do want to find out more about you, how do they get more, Mark? How do they find out more about Lean?
Yeah, so one place hopefully would be interesting to people is leanblog.org. I of course have a blog. I do podcasts, about 30 podcasts a year or so. I've interviewed Paul Akers a couple of times, which is always energizing. Yeah. I interview people from healthcare and manufacturing and all sorts of different industries. So that's one of the places. And I also have a website, markgraban.com, which describes some of the speaking and consulting and writing and things that I do.
Yeah. Now, don't be shy. I understand you have a book coming out.
I do. I've written a couple of books that have been published about Lean and Kaizen in healthcare. The books are called Lean Hospitals, Healthcare Kaizen, not real creative. I am working on a book now that's more about this question of metrics and how do you manage your metrics.
No way.
I'm sorry?
No way. So you're writing a book now on metrics?
Yes.
Yeah.
And right now it's an ebook, but I've got here's what the cover I think will look like.
Oh.
The book is called Measures of Success, so it's a little bit more creative of a title. The subtitle is React Less, Lead Better, Improve More. And the roller coaster there, I'll show that. That kind of represents more of what it feels like right now. We're on this roller coaster of metrics go up, metrics go down, we overreact, we investigate, we're chasing our tail sometimes. So we'd like to get off the roller coaster and kind of quit wasting time investigating situations where it's, again, like to use the term noise in the system, and to kind of focus our time as leaders and problem solvers.
Well, thank you for writing it. Those are valuable. I like reading your blog because I like getting outside perspectives. It challenges my mind to think about how can I apply this to something else. That's really
I try to put myself in that same situation where I'm running across people from different industries, different professions, because it's easy to get trapped in, the conventional wisdom of an industry. And I think it's great for anyone that reaches out and learns from somebody different.
Well, you used you had a Dilbert cartoon.
Yeah.
In the last one that I read, which was a couple weeks ago, and a shredder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny that cartoon came out about 2 weeks after it was the Sunday Dilbert strip. And I had done an April Fool's post for a company I'm involved in, a different logo over my shoulder, Kaizen, which is a software company. And it's software to help support an organization's improvement work. And so I did a blog post, an April Fool's joke about we've now developed a box, and you put your suggestion into the box, and the box scans what's on the paper, and then it also shreds it and communicates to a server. But in the Dilbert cartoon, Dilbert says, "All right, we've designed the box. The scanner and the shredder work, but the connectivity doesn't work or whatever." And the boss said, like, "Oh, we don't have time to fix that. You need to just ship the product now." So basically all it was a shredder.
It was a shredder for the employee suggestion box. Yeah.
So I was kind of on a similar wavelength there with Scott Adams.
Well, see, that's why I read blogs from outside this industry, so that I get those inspiration. Reminder to read Dilbert. That's what I got.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tom.
It's been great, and I hopefully our listeners and viewers are getting the info they need to just. If my takeaway from you today is find that thing that to change, and then my other takeaway from you today is look for the numbers that indicate the health of something else. They're always there.
Yeah. Well, and maybe kind of final point. There's a common expression. There's different versions of it. If you can't measure something, you can't manage it. So a lot of times people focus on the measures. This book explores more of how do we manage those metrics? How do we look at them? How do we best focus and drive improvement so that we're not just measuring, we're actually managing and leading and improving.
Amazing. That's good. There's lots of info out there for us to use. It's just, we have to find the time to do it. That's so much good info. All right, Mark. Well, thank you so much for joining us here. Maybe we'll have you back one day on the Cabinet Maker Profit System when you are dealing with cabinetry in hospitals and how they are buying all their cabinetry, because our guys are very interested in knowing how to get more hospital gigs.
All right. Yeah.
I just strung that one together there. But all right. Thank you very much. Yeah. Have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks.